Welcome to A Cup of Gratitude with Amanda Schaefer. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm so glad you stopped by. This podcast is really for anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's about taking a moment to slow down and look around and actually see all of the good things that are there. There's no question that asks, is your cup half empty or half full? But I think a better question is, what's in your cup? I mean, a drop of gratitude will benefit your life unimaginably more than a full cup of anything else. So let's settle in and take a look at how we can shift our focus and embrace the joy and the wonder of the life that we have. And once you start, you won't be able to stop seeing the good. And just like me, you won't be able to stop talking about it. And somehow that creates even more. Even in the midst of difficulty, even when it's really hard, learn how to drink from a cup of gratitude. Welcome. Today we are talking to Jackie Wrede. Jackie felt a strong calling to adopt children from a very young age, but she could never have imagined the journey God would take her on to realize her dream. The spectrum of emotions and experiences on this ride have been wild and at times overwhelming. The old saying, man plans, God laughs, could not be more true as her journey with motherhood unfolds. Through it all, God's peace that truly surpasses all understanding has been the constant. Welcome, Jackie. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Amanda. I'm really excited.
Me too. We've been trying to do this for a while.
Yes, we have.
Busy lives. All right. So I am going to jump right in with a question that I think will help us build a good foundation for your story. So you always had adoption in mind, you had told me, because your childhood was difficult due to some family mental health issues. So you weren't certain that you wanted to have biological children. Could you tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Absolutely. I think first of all, it's really important to say that as a young child, I had a good childhood. I look back on my childhood fondly, and I know that my family provided for me, and I love them very much for that. But as I started to grow older, especially into my teen years, it just became apparent some of the chemistry issues that existed within my house, specifically within my immediate family. So I have multiple immediate family members who suffer from various mental illnesses. So in just my immediate family, there's drug and alcohol addiction, borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and a couple other ones. So yes, all of these illnesses alone are very difficult to manage and challenging, but having them all coexist simultaneously under one roof is a lot. And it made my home life incredibly chaotic. And it was just something that I did not want to emulate. And it was something that I was terrified I was going to pass on to my children, being that a lot of mental illnesses are hereditary. So it was a large source of worry, and I just had a lot of worry over recreating that environment for my children.
Yeah, well, that's totally understandable. And, I think as parents, there's so many different things that we have to think about before we have children. And it's really wise that that was in your equation.
Thank you. It weighed very heavily on my mind.
Yeah. So in 2017, you and your husband decided to go through the adoption journey, but you ended up doing something different. Could you tell us about that process?
Sure. So at first we decided we wanted to go through the adoption journey. So me being the planner and the researcher in the family, I looked into private adoption first. Both on the domestic side and the international side. My husband specifically was very adamant that he wanted a child from the United States. So international private adoption very quickly dropped off of the possibility. And then domestic private adoption really just didn't feel right to us. So I kept looking a little bit more and started looking into the foster care system and the process to adopt through the foster care system. And my husband and I attended an informational session. It was about an hour and was right around our house. And we just got the feeling that it was right. So that's what we decided we wanted to do. So we set out to try to set up for full training.
Mm-hmm.
To become certified in Connecticut, which is the state that I live in, you have to go through a 12-week intensive training course. It's
Uh-huh.
meeting 3 to 4 hours a week. We met on Monday nights eventually, and it's for 12 weeks. But with my husband's work schedule at the time, he was just so busy that we could never find a session where we could make all 12 consecutive weeks. He didn't have a regular work schedule like a lot of people do. It varied from week to week.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a challenge for us. And we actually had to wait about a year before a session was actually available that aligned with our schedules and allowed us to take the training. And that waiting was just, it was very difficult for me because we knew this is what we
Yeah.
wanted to do.
Yeah. I mean, you did so much and then you had to just sit around and wait. That must have been excruciating.
Yes, I've never been one to like waiting before. So it
Well,
was
few of
hard.
us, few of us do. I mean, there's always something happening though. There's always something. What do you think was happening while you were waiting?
I'm I'm not sure exactly what it was. Maybe we just weren't ready. I mean, I think a lot of things have transpired since then with both of our careers
Mm-hmm.
that have really kind of evened out our life and made our life a little calmer than
Yeah.
it was at that time and more prepared for a parenthood role. And in 2017, I had just transitioned to a new role. So I think maybe the stress of all of that all at once might have been a little bit much for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, God always knows when the perfect time is, and that makes a lot of sense. Now, while you were navigating all of this, you got pregnant. How did you feel? What was running through your mind?
Well, yes, that was definitely something I didn't see coming. Well, yes and no. At a certain point of trying to find a class and trying to make something work so hard, we just decided that we were ready to have a child, one way or another. We were
Right.
like, we're going to do this. So we decided to try to have a child of our own. But we didn't really anticipate that it would happen before we even got into the training. So it was just
Well,
really emotional. I mean, I was overjoyed when I found out that I was pregnant. I was extremely happy.
yeah.
I was at a point where I felt like my relationship with my husband was strong enough and my mental health was strong enough that I didn't have all of those fears that I had had. I mean, they
Yeah.
certainly were in my mind, but they weren't overbearing and they weren't driving my decisions like they did when I was younger.
Yeah.
Um, but I was also still as determined as ever to get into training to adopt a baby. I just kept envisioning our children being really close in age and growing up together and having that sibling bond.
Yeah.
So it was interesting because at this point, we really had not told very many people in our life at all that we were pursuing adoption,
Mm-hmm.
but we shared our news of our pregnancy with them. So part of me was upset going through, having a baby shower and having people be excited for me because everybody was celebrating this baby that wasn't born,
Yeah.
but I wanted them to be celebrating babies. I wanted them to be
Yeah.
celebrating the child would be adopting. So I tried my best to separate the two in my mind, but it was difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
And
I
then,
mean, I'm just hearing even in your voice now as you recount what happened. Yeah, there is a sorrow there because like you had this plan and you had this dream, but it was really like from like the motherhood part of your heart.
yes. And
Wow.
then as we're going through the pregnancy, I was basically in my third trimester when we finally found a training that worked for us. So we decided to sign up for it anyway, and we graduated from our training course, and I gave birth 2 weeks later.
Wow, that is amazing. Wow. So, from what I understood when we were talking at our pre-recording call, you had to wait 9 months after the birth of your daughter to get licensed because that was the time that they allotted for like, if there was like a large or big different life event. And it occurs to me that that amount of time was kind of like having another pregnancy, like waiting for this new season to be born. What was that like for you? Or were you busy getting no sleep and changing diapers and not really considering that?
Well, I was definitely busy with all of that. But the thought, it never left my mind. It was definitely a strange time because on one hand, I was ecstatic to be with my daughter
Yeah.
and have that one-on-one bonding time with her and transitioning into motherhood. And I knew that at a certain point, it wouldn't be just her. And so I tried to focus on the time with just her because I knew I would never get it back.
Yeah.
But there was definitely a part of me that every day I was just wishing there were two of them. And and I know that the transition to motherhood is messy
Yeah.
and it's emotional and it's so many things. And there were so many days where I just felt defeated with one child. And then I would think, how could I ever possibly do this with two?
Yeah.
And I would just try to push that out of my mind and I would just stay determined because I knew that somewhere out there there was another baby for us. And so I just tried as often as I could between the no sleeping and the changing diapers and
Yeah.
feeding. I
Yeah.
just tried to pray over that baby and the daughter that I already had as constantly as I could.
No, that's really wise that you took it to prayer. And what was your husband like during this time? Was he going through similar things, or was it different for him?
I think that he didn't talk about it much about the journey of adoption at the time. Adoption was really something that I brought to the table in our marriage, and it's definitely something that he agreed with me on. It's not like he was hesitant to do it.
Hmm.
Once I actually made it clear to him long before we got married that this was what I wanted in my life, and if he wasn't open to it, then we couldn't be a thing.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
was very receptive to it. But during the time when it was just my daughter, we really didn't talk about it much other than here and there. And
Yeah.
I think for him too, he was also trying to focus on the time with our daughter and just really enjoy that because fatherhood was also a huge adjustment for him.
I
He
bet.
never
Yeah.
really had kids in his life. He didn't
Wow.
have much of an experience with that. So I think it was a big learning curve for him to get used to it 24/7.
Yeah. It sounds like maybe God gave you guys a little grace there.
Yes, I think so.
So, once you started the matching process, how long was it before a child was placed with you?
So we officially got licensed the Monday before Thanksgiving
Hmm.
in 2019, and we didn't have a child placed with us until June 11th of the following year.
Wow.
So it was a lot longer than I had heard people say it would be,
Yeah.
but the matches that we got, they just kept rolling in almost immediately. I still remember the very first match that we got was less than a week after we got licensed.
Hmm.
And we had to say no to it because of behavioral concerns with the child we were matched with.
Yeah.
And it it crushed me. I knew in my heart that this child wasn't right for our family and we should have
Yeah.
said no, but it hurt me so bad to say no and just think, what if everybody else says no?
Wow. That's powerful. That's powerful. And I have a friend who went into fostering, and I remember the first few times that she was waiting, and she was waiting to get matched and waiting to get matched. And she ended up not getting matched right away. And I remember her turmoil in that, thinking, wait, I've done all of this work and I have this heart and I have a room and all of these toys and all of these supplies. Where is this child? So going through the waiting process just must be something like that's more than just waiting. What did that feel like for you?
So it was frustrating for me because as time passed, we kept getting matches. Some weeks we would get more than one match a week.
Wow.
And honestly, we said yes to almost everyone after that first one,
Hmm.
but they never picked us for one reason or another. We were never the family that was picked for that child. And I got angry and frustrated a lot because I would get invested in the little bit of information we had about these kids. And
Yeah.
I would start picturing what our life would look like with them or what they might look like. And it never played out. It never happened. So after waiting as long as we did to even get to this stage,
Yeah.
and then seeing the community that I had of friends who were also licensed, the people we had gone through classes with, and I have a couple other friends doing it as well, and they got placements and had kids with them so much faster. And I started to get a little bit jealous and think, why is this happening for everybody else? But we have all of these things to give, and nobody will take us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly how she had felt, and later on realized that the kids that she got were the ones she was supposed to. So eventually, after all the time of not being matched up, you eventually changed to sibling pairs, and then you did get a match. And one of the boys was actually out of the age range that you had originally requested, but you said yes anyway. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So we did switch to sibling pairs actually because of one of the matches that we had received.
Mhm.
So we had talked about being open to sibling pairs during the training process. They mention it to you because it is rare to find families that will take multiple children. A lot
Yeah,
of the families that sign up are only willing to take one child at a time.
yeah,
And when we talked about it, we just kind of thought that, having three, since I was already very pregnant, having three would be too much for us at once, and we weren't ready for that. But we received a match for a little boy. And one of the things that stuck out to me in his bio was that they tried to match him and his brother with a family, but nobody was willing to take them both.
mhm, mhm,
And when I say my heart broke for that, I mean
yeah,
like it ripped open. I openly sobbed. And I remember talking to my husband that night about how we could make it work. I said we could do it. I just know that we could. And I couldn't think about these siblings being ripped apart just because nobody was willing to be uncomfortable enough to keep them together.
yeah,
And, being in the foster care system, these children are already experiencing trauma of one variety or another. And to have to split them apart is just making it worse. And I thought if we can lessen that for one pair of siblings, I mean, we have to. It really wasn't even a choice for
oh,
me.
absolutely. I mean, keeping them together changed the trajectory of their life for sure.
Yes. And so then we decided to change all of our paperwork. And we did. And then we got our first sibling pair match. We still got a couple single matches after that. But the first match we got that was a sibling pair, I prayed about it. We prayed about it separately and together. And it just felt like God was saying yes. Very clearly. The older of the two boys, yes, he was outside of our age range, but he was only a year outside of our age range. And we talked through how at that age it really wasn't that big of a deal. We had put birth to 5 and this child was 6.
Mhm.
And we both just felt like God was telling us to go for it, so we did.
Wow, that's amazing. Will you tell us a little about the boys moving in, becoming part of your family? What was that like?
Well, it was chaos, to put it in a single word. Good chaos, but we had about 2 weeks from the time that we got confirmation that they were placed with us to when they moved in.
Wow.
So those 2 weeks are just a blur to me. I mean, logistically, there was so much to do.
Yeah.
We, even though we had said yes to two, we hadn't thought that we would be saying yes to two with one of them being an elementary age child. So we had to go and buy a lot to make our home ready for him.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks passed and they were dropped off at our house. And the first night was just emotional. I'd waited so long for this to happen. And as I was waiting for them to come, I was thinking, are they going to like me? Are they going to be receptive? What challenges are going to happen? I had so many thoughts running through my head.
Mm.
I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And that first night, the younger of the boys was 2 when he came to us, and I remember he just cried in my arms
No.
for like an hour. And I finally rocked him to sleep, but he was sobbing basically up until the time that he went to sleep. And the older boy, he just wanted to check everything out. He was like, this is a new house.
Yeah.
I'm with my brother. He was so excited to be back with his brother because they were placed in separate foster homes up until that point.
Oh,
So
wow.
he was just, let me check everything out. Let me go, let me go, let me go. So when it was bedtime, he was not ready to turn off for the night. But we did eventually get them both to bed. And my daughter, throughout all of this, she just wanted all of our attention because she was like, who are these 2 kids that just
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
So juggling all of that after we finally got everybody to bed, which was probably like 10:30 or 11 o'clock, I want
Mhm.
to say, um, it was just so overwhelming. And my husband and I looked at each other and we were just like, what are we doing? Like, what did we get ourselves into? And then it just kind of slowly turned into a rhythm and it became our new normal. And they got comfortable with us and we got comfortable with them. And it just really became our baseline after a while and we got used to it.
That's beautiful. I mean, it was such a leap of faith, really. You didn't know what you were doing. You filled out papers and you took classes, but you didn't really know what it was going to be like. Have you ever taken a leap of faith like that before?
Um, no, no, definitely not. And I would have to say that it was terrifying to think about
Yeah.
beforehand and during. I remember, so during, because this happened in June, end of May, beginning of June 2020. So the COVID-19 pandemic was in its infancy at that point. So
Mhm.
we were still very much homebound and doing things insularly at our home. So one of the traditions that we had created was that every Sunday we would go for a Sunday drive. And I remember the Sunday before the boys moved in with us, we were driving and my husband pulled over and he just looked at me and he said exactly what you're saying. He said, we've never taken a leap of faith like this. Are we
Wow.
crazy?
Wow.
And I looked him dead in the eye and I said, yes, we are. We have to be crazy to be doing this, but God's got us.
Yeah. And like a lot of people that listen, unless you're a new listener, and if you are, hello, thanks for joining us, know that I moved in right before the pandemic started to help my parents who are 87 and 91. And when I said yes to God for this, I have no idea how this will go, how long this will last, how many years I'm going to be caring for them. Their wish was to stay in their home until they passed, and that's what my son and I are doing. But I mean, this could be 5 years, 1 year, we don't know. And I had said before, I think this was my biggest leap of faith, because I think a lot of times you have a leap of faith, but it's not really that much of a leap. Like, you kind of know, okay, God's asking me to do this thing, I'm going to do it. But you kind of know how long it's going to be, how much it's going to hurt your wallet or your pride or whatever the case may be. But when you have no idea, and there's 2 of them, just like with me, there's more than one person now you're suddenly responsible for. It's a little bit, I think, of the first time that I ever really said, yes, I will do whatever you want me to do, God, where I really think I was serving for the first time.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of parallels there. And I just remember being so uncomfortable
Yeah.
and unsure, but sure. Like the whole time, I just knew that it was right. And I knew that God was telling us, it's okay. I've got this. It'll be okay.
Yeah. That's really awesome. Now, I mean, you even had to get a different car to hold everybody, didn't you?
I did. Yes, we did.
Lots of changes. Was all that change scary?
It was. It was definitely scary. Like I mentioned, I am very much a planner,
Hmm.
and there was no planning any of this. Um, There was just so much that needed to change and things that changed on the fly from the time we found out to the time they moved in and moving forward. And I mean,
Yeah.
aside from the car, we didn't have a bed for a 6-year-old. We'd
Yeah.
only ever planned in our head for babies and toddlers. So all we had was a convertible crib. And so we went out and bought bunk beds,
Wow.
thinking long term, they'll grow up. Then the younger boy can just move to the bunk bed. We
Hmm.
had to buy more car seats, booster seats, bedding for the twin size bed, toys that they were going to like. It was honestly a mad dash so that we could make our home as comfortable as possible for them.
Wow. 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 That is a lot. I mean,
Yes,
that's
it
a
certainly
lot.
felt like it.
I know one kid can feel like chaos, you know?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a question that's probably really hard to answer. What was it like for you when the boys would leave for visitation with their family?
So when they first moved in with us, like I said, it was kind of at the beginning of the height of the pandemic. And so all of their visits were virtual for the
Right.
first 2 months about that they were with us.
Hmm.
So they would meet with their whole family once a week on Teams, which is, similar to Zoom, Skype, FaceTime platform. And as anybody who has ever spent any time with a toddler can imagine, trying to keep a 2-year-old engaged on Teams for an hour
Oh my God.
was quite a difficult task.
Yeah.
And, this particular family, we had 2 of 6 siblings. So it was an online meeting place for 7 people, ranging from 2 to adult aged.
Wow.
And I wasn't present for a lot of the virtual visits. My husband, he took the brunt of that responsibility, but I know for him to listen to it was very difficult.
I bet.
We always said from the beginning that we would take an open adoption, which we knew this would be, because as long as it's healthy for the kids,
Yeah.
we would always want them to know who their parents are. And in this particular case, they only had a relationship with their father. They did not have a relationship with their mother.
Hmm.
And so it was really hard to navigate wanting them to know their father and wanting them to have this connection, but also very much wanting to be their mother and father and wanting to solidify that relationship that we were creating.
Yeah. And there must have
So,
been a part of you that felt like you wanted to protect them too.
yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And that was difficult. So, especially once the summer went on and they moved to in person.
Hmm.
So, when they moved to in person, my daughter would get upset that they were gone because she was with them 24/7. And then they would be gone and they'd come back and they'd be talking about their dad. Um, and that was hard for her. So, it was hard for me to watch for her. And then once they started going in person, they would come back, and as is very common, there were behavioral issues in our home after they saw their family.
Yeah.
So navigating that was difficult. And I honestly feel like the more the visits went on, the harder they got for me.
Yeah.
Because our bonds got stronger. And
I
I,
don't
like
I
you
don't
said,
think
I
I
had to
could do it.
protect.
I don't think I could. It takes a special person. I don't think I could do that.
I look back on it and sometimes I think, how did I do that?
Yeah.
Because I I didn't really think about it in that sense. It was
Yeah.
always just like, oh, well, it's probably best for them to know who their father is. And I kind of didn't think about the impact that that would have on me.
Yeah.
So it was difficult.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful thing that you wanted to do that. I don't know that I would be able to do it. My personality is very, I'm gregarious and I'm an advocate kind of person, but I have this mama bear switch in there.
Mhm.
Just don't mess with my children. And so I really think I would have had a lot of difficulty trying to navigate that situation. And I know you have that too. I
Yes.
just, you must have a little more of a helping of the fruit of the spirit than I do.
God
Wow.
help me with that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I can only imagine what that was like. Now, I've heard all different kinds of experiences that people have had, some good, some bad. How was your experience working with your social worker?
Well, honestly, it was very trying for me. Um, when the boys first came to us, they had a social worker who I really very much liked.
Hmm.
And she ended up moving out of state in October, so she had to be replaced on the case with a new social worker. And to put it simply, we did not get along. Um, I just felt like she was constantly making things difficult for the boys and difficult for us. And what was really frustrating to me through it all was that I never got the feeling that she was putting the boys first, which should
Mm.
have been her job,
Well, it is her
or
job. It is her job.
yes,
Yeah.
or equally that she had any sense of caring or respect for my family and the work that we were putting in for these children. So trying to be respectful of her and navigate that relationship for the boys was extremely difficult for me.
Yeah.
And it actually, the relationship between us deteriorated so quickly that she actually wasn't even allowed to speak to us at a certain point. She was only allowed to communicate with us in written forums because the trust had just been broken, and the way that she was treating us just got to be such a stressor in our life that was not helpful to the boys and not helpful to us.
Oh my goodness. I mean, that's supposed to be your support system.
Yes, and it was quite the opposite.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. I'm sorry that that was your experience.
Thank you.
So, how was your husband doing during this time? Did you both have the same expectations at this point?
I think that a lot of the times we were on the same page, but we were in different phases of reaction. So
Mm,
a lot of times when I was mad, he was calm and he was there to listen to me scream and yell or cry or whatever I had to do. And then when he would lose his mind, I was there to kind of be a sense of reason and calming. And so it was really interesting watching that dynamic between us
yeah,
because we both processed everything so differently, but we always regrouped and talked through it together. And I mean, I can think of several times he walked me back from the ledge and vice versa. And we really learned that to be successful, we had to put our relationship and our family first because we would never be able to provide what the kids need if we weren't protective of ourselves and supportive of ourselves. And that was hugely important to learn through all of this. And I was just so glad that he is the person that God put in my life to spend my life with because through this ride that he never ever imagined taking with
yeah,
his life, he has just been a rock and wonderful.
absolutely. I mean, first of all, it's got to feel good to know that your marriage actually got stronger and that God had given you the right partners, that you balanced each other and helped each other move through such a difficult time.
Yes.
And second of all, I think it's so wise what you said, so wise that if your family wasn't healthy, then how could you bring in anyone else? You know, it reminds me of in the airplane where the oxygen comes down, they say the mom has to take it first. You know, if your family unit wasn't exactly the best that it could be, how could you bring anyone else in and be good for them? So, so wise.
Thank you.
Now, you mentioned to me during our pre-recording call that your husband had gotten laid off during the pandemic. He worked in sports television, so suddenly there were no jobs available. Did it become like daddy daycare at home?
Absolutely. He dove headfirst into daddy daycare, and honestly, it's a role that he never ever saw himself playing once again.
Yeah.
Um, so he did great with it. One of the lucky things was that our daycare facility did reopen in the summer. So he was able to get some respite from the two toddlers a few days a week. So he wasn't always home with all three of them, but our oldest son, he was in hybrid mode at his school.
Yeah.
So he was home 3 days a week, in school 2 days a week. Some weeks he was home 5 days a week. It really just depended on what the schedule was. And I think that experience taught both my husband and I a great deal of patience, because teaching elementary school aged children is trying, and it will test you.
Girl, yeah. I mean, my kids were 9 years apart, and God knew what he was doing. I love children, but I can't even imagine. Oh, I can't even imagine. That's amazing.
Yeah, and I think we're both just so happy that he had that time
Yeah.
with the kids, and that they got to experience the one-on-one time that, I mean, we both did. It's
Hmm.
not like I never had one-on-one time with them, but he definitely kind of took the weekday parenting by the reins and
Yeah.
set the schedule. And I think for the boys, especially my daughter as well, to see that, and especially to see that from a father figure, is something that I think will be very important to them for the rest of their life.
Absolutely. What a great example. And I'm
Yeah.
just picturing, I don't know what your husband looks like, but here's this sports television guy, who I would imagine, was very inundated with things that are more manly. And I'm picturing him laying on the floor, rough and tumble with these kids all piled on top of him. I'm picturing him, and he'll probably kill me if he hears this, but like sitting, having a tea party, with the kids at the table, and just like getting to explore a part of himself, like you said, that maybe he never even thought about.
Yeah, and I think some of it he was in his glory, because our older son really took to the toys he had from his childhood that he had saved. So they had
Oh,
Star Wars battles, and
oh,
they would play with trucks. And um, the older son that we had was very into Spider-Man and Nerf guns. And so I think he got to relive a little bit of his childhood with that. I mean, he loves our daughter and he loves being a girl dad, but I think he really liked
yeah.
having the boys and getting to do things with them.
No, that's very cool. There were probably tea parties though, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So, what were your expectations when the boys moved in? From what I understand, you were preparing for them to join your family, right? You weren't
Yes,
working towards reunification. The idea was that you were preparing for them to be part of your family.
correct. So when the boys first came to us, they had a termination of parental rights pending in the Connecticut state court system.
Okay.
So they had a court date scheduled for late March 2020,
Uh-huh.
but thank you, COVID, the courts shut down and they got delayed. So they came to us, and we were assured by social worker supervisors, lawyers, anybody we talked to when they moved in with us, that the
Hmm.
state was going to do everything they could to keep the boys with us, and that there was little chance the termination wouldn't be granted. And, these kids were moving in with us and they were going to be our sons.
Right.
So that was our expectation. But then fast forward 4 months and a new social worker, and everything changed.
So, what was the final outcome?
So we they put together a plan, a reunification plan is what it's called, where various different social workers and other healthcare professionals complete assessments, put together timelines, and they gather this information to, one, see if dad is ready to have his kids,
Hmm.
two, see if the kids are ready to go back to dad, and three, figure out what the best way for that to look like is.
Hmm.
On paper is what it was sold to us as. So they did do a lot of that. And of course, if anybody has ever dealt with anything with the state, it was always very last minute that we got these plans. And To us, a lot of times it seemed rushed and not necessarily thorough in some of the things that went into the planning. But we did get a final plan and a final timeline eventually. So we sent in the plan involved more frequent week time visits, and then it would transition to an overnight, and then a 2-night overnight, and then a 3-night overnight, just so it wasn't them going, from not seeing their dad in person for over a year to all of a sudden living with their dad again, to try to ease that transition. So we sent the boys for their second overnight visit on a Sunday. It was actually Valentine's Day. And we said goodbye to them. We told them we would see them on Tuesday because it was a 2-night overnight when the social worker dropped them back off at our house. We settled in for the night. We, talked about how weird it was that it was just our daughter in the house for only the second time in 8 months at that point in time.
Yeah.
And then on Tuesday afternoon, about 4 hours before they were scheduled to come home to us, we got a call from the supervisor on the case that they would never be coming back. And
oh, gosh,
I can honestly say that I have never cried harder in my life.
Oh my gosh, I can't even. How do you deal with that?
Well, I had to call my husband because the caseworker only called me. And I called him, and I couldn't say it. I mean, I probably sat on the phone for a minute just crying before I could finally even vocalize, what had happened. And it was just, gut-wrenching is probably the closest description I have to it. I mean, in my head, I knew that this was the plan. I knew that they were going to be going home. Whether I thought it was what was best for them or not. My job was to prepare them for that, and I had started doing that, but I also thought I had more time. I thought I had more hugs and kisses and bedtime stories, and all of a sudden, all of that was taken away, and it was almost like I couldn't process it.
Yeah, and can you imagine what it was like for them?
I cannot. I mean, that still really bothers me to think about them just being cut off from communication with us.
Yeah.
That's where I really have to trust God and say, I don't know why this happened the way it did, and I don't know what this is going to look like for them, but there's a reason for it. There has to be a reason for it.
Yeah. How was it for your daughter being home alone without them?
It was and still is difficult for them. They've been gone for, at this point, 3 months, and she still asks for them. In the beginning, it was a lot. Yeah. She would ask multiple times a day. Now it's not quite as frequent. I mean, she is 2, so she doesn't really have much of an outward emotional reaction. It's more matter of fact, like, she'll see something in our house that will remind her of them, or we'll go to daycare sometimes and she'll ask if our younger foster son is going to be there because he used to go to the same daycare as her. And so it's hard, but we always told her, we always were honest with her, to the extent that you can be with a 2-year-old. We were very open in telling her that they went to be back with their daddy. And that they are never coming back to our house. So she had that expectation, in some capacity in her brain, and she gets it. And she, for a while, would say it to random people. She would just say, they went to be with their daddy, no come home. And that was very hard for me, but also kind of made me feel like in some way she gets it. She'll never get it. I will never really get it. But at least she knows.
Yeah, that's got to be very difficult.
Yes.
Now, about a week after the boys left, in, again, ridiculous timing, you found out you were pregnant again. Yes. And first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
But I mean, how hard must that have been emotionally?
It was honestly one of those moments where I was like, I can't believe this is happening. I mean, honestly, I was elated, right? I was super excited to be having another baby, but also I was so sad because I just kept thinking they'll never know their older brothers.
Yeah.
Um, a couple of times I've stopped myself while we've been recording and I'll say foster sons, but to me they're my sons. They might not live with me anymore,
Yeah.
and nobody knows what the future looks like. They probably will never live with me again, but I mean maybe they will one day. I don't know, but to me, though, they're my daughter's brothers and this baby's brother. And to make it even more emotional, we found out very shortly thereafter that it's a boy that we're having.
Oh,
So
congratulations. That's amazing.
thank you. It's hard for me to even articulate the emotions that go around that.
Yeah.
Um, when we meet new people or we talk to people that maybe we haven't had much contact with because of COVID, they always ask if it's our first child, and my husband and I are like, how do we answer that?
Yeah.
It's our second child, but technically it's also our fourth child, and it's just a lot to carry. I find myself a lot of times when people ask me about this pregnancy not wanting to talk about it as much
Hmm.
because I just don't know if I'm ready to. Like, I am very excited. I'm very excited, and I feel so blessed that God has blessed us with this child. But I'm also still grieving, and I'm also still very much trying to process everything that happened in the last year.
Yeah.
So it's difficult for me.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Here's a question. Would you do it again?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In a
Yeah.
heartbeat.
Yeah. Because you know what? You're a mom and you're right. They were your children and nothing takes that away. You acted as their mother and they were your children. And just because they're no longer with you doesn't mean that that didn't happen.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, we would do it again. We plan to do it again. With this child on the way right now, we're not really sure what that timing will look like, but
uh-huh.
we will do it again
That's awesome.
at
That's
some
awesome.
point.
You're very special people, and
Thank
I
you.
see God strengthening you and giving you guys the right muscles and the right teamwork and the things that you need to do this again. So that makes me happy. It's very
Thank you.
unusual to meet people that can do this and do it well and have that heart. Now you lead women's ministry at your church and you connect with moms, you have your own child, you have another on the way. You have a heart for adoption and fostering, yet you don't have a close relationship with your mom. You have this spiritual heart of motherhood. It's just so obvious to me. How does it feel to see that God has chosen that role for you?
It's wild. I mean, it's absolutely wild to me. I just look at my life and the way that God has orchestrated my life to get to where I am now.
Yeah.
And I'm just in awe of him. I mean, to see how rooted I have become in motherhood despite what my past has been inspires me. And I feel so blessed that God has stuck with me on this
Yeah.
journey and he's gotten me to where I am. And it makes me hopeful and excited for what's going to come next. The last year has definitely been, in some ways, it's been a mountain and been top of the world rejoicing moments, but there's been a lot of valleys in my journey for motherhood in the last year. And so I just look back and I honestly am like, well, what is this going to play it to in the future?
Yeah.
Um, and I'm excited to see that. Even
I'm
if I'm not in the moment excited to see that, when I step back,
yeah.
I am looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be a beautiful story. I'm excited to see it.
Thank you.
Now, during the pandemic, you had been pretty career focused. because you wanted to be financially stable because your husband wasn't able to work at the time. But you said that began to shift. Why do you think that was?
Yes. So I saw my husband taking on this huge responsibility of day-to-day parenting. And to put it quite simply, I was jealous. Um, I understood why it was the way that it was. And I'm very happy, like I said, that he did that.
Yeah.
But I saw it and I thought to myself, well, why isn't that me? Like traditionally that should be me and that's what I want to be doing. And don't get me wrong, I love my job and
Yeah.
I very much believe that no matter where God places you for work, you have to give your best. He designed us to work.
That's true.
And that's part of our life and I do believe that for me, I will always be a working mother. As crazy as it sounds, as we talked so much at length about how motherhood is in my DNA, but
Yep.
I just think that working is what's best for my life and my balance in my family. But I started to realize that what really defined my life wasn't found in work. Yes, we need to work and put our best foot forward, but that's not who I am.
Yeah.
And I don't need to climb the corporate ladder as fast as I was or as fast as I thought I needed to. Um, I was able to provide for my family of 5 right where I was.
Yeah.
And our life was wonderful. And I'm very thankful for that. And it just caused me to take a step back and look at it all
Yeah.
in a different perspective.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong. You can have an identity and a mother heart and still want to work. I mean, I'm immediately think of the Proverbs 31 woman. She was up early working. She was taking care of her family and they called her blessed, so you can have both. You told me something that I found extremely wise. You said that when you prayed for the boys, you always prayed open-ended. You prayed for their family and for what God wanted to do. And you leaned into God instead of into your emotions and your desires. How has this grown your faith and relationship with God, do you think?
I mean, exponentially. It's weird to say it out loud,
Yeah.
but even in the darkest moments of this journey, I always felt peace. Now, I might not have been happy with what God was doing, but I never once felt like he didn't have it. And I'll admit, I got mad at God multiple times. More mad than I would care to confess, honestly.
Yeah.
But again, I never felt like he let go of us. And my faith and my trust in him is so much stronger. And my life is just better for it. I worry a lot less. My emotional highs aren't quite as high, and my lows aren't quite as low. And being grounded in the peace of just submitting to God
Yeah.
really solidified for me that I can never begin to fathom what he has in store for me. And that is really cool.
Yeah.
I find a lot of comfort in that.
Yeah. That's amazing. I see the wonder in your life and the awe and the obedience, and it's just amazing to watch. And okay, so can I tell people how I know you now?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is crazy for me because Jackie was in youth group years and years ago when I was helping with youth group at a church. And so for us to know each other now and have this moment all these years later, where she is a mom and doing some of these amazing things and seeing how her faith has grown is just such a beautiful thing for me.
Thank you. I'm just so happy that we got to connect like this.
Me too. This is so cool. For me, I mean, you see kids in youth group and, they say, not everybody's going to even be in church, years later. And it's just really neat to see what a strong woman of God you've become.
Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you.
Well, it means a lot to see, like, I mean, I'm just overwhelmed with the beautiful things God's doing with your life. It's just so amazing. And these are the kinds of stories I love to share because of just that. It shows who God is because, you can see how he's just taking you and preparing you and, giving you the things you need. Maybe you didn't know you did, or, you know, but there's still the things you need, or helping you through the times that are just chaos and overwhelming, and just making this close relationship with you to take you all the way through to your calling. And what you guys are doing, what you and your husband are doing, is just so important in our world. um, I was wondering if you might be able to give any advice to anyone else that might be considering fostering or adoption. Is there anything you would tell any of our listeners that might be thinking about that?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's going to be nothing like you expect. I learned that pretty quickly, and there are no two journeys that are alike. And I think that for me, going in with an open-ended mind and going in, you have to be aware that what your expectations are might not be what happens.
Yep.
And as difficult as that was, I went in thinking, yeah, sure, it's not going to go the way that I think it's going to go, but it'll be all right. And it
Yeah.
has been, but not in the way that I imagined it when I was starting. And you just have to be willing to submit yourself to these kids and really do what's best for them. Because it is very easy to put on that mindset of, well, this is what I think is best for them. And really, it's what's best for you.
Yeah.
So I think being open-ended and being honest, there is a point, and my husband and I got to this point for sure, later in our journey, like I mentioned, prioritizing us. If you don't prioritize your family, nobody else is going to.
Yeah.
And we ran into that with some issues we had with the boys very later on in their placement. And you have to be willing to put your foot down. And it's hard because, like I said, you have to do what's best for the kids, but you also have to balance what's best for your family. And sometimes they don't align.
Yeah.
And it's hard to realize that and go through it. And I'm making it seem very daunting, and it is very daunting, but you'll also find a strength in yourself that you never knew you had, and a community of people
Yeah.
that you might not be connected with now that are going through the same thing, and lean into them. That's my other biggest advice. Lean into the foster care and adoption community, because the other caregivers that you will meet are the only people that will remotely understand what you are going through.
Yeah. That's great advice. That's great
Thank you.
advice. Now, I want to ask you one last question, and this is my favorite question because I just love the answers. They're always so good. If you could give any advice to your younger self, what would that be?
So I want to go back a couple questions to answer this question. And the open-ended thing is really stuck with me. So I would tell my younger self not to pigeonhole my requests to God. Because when I was younger, I spent a lot of time praying for specific outcomes.
Yeah.
God, I want this to happen. I want this person to do this, or this situation to work out this way. And, there's certainly nothing wrong with praying about what you want, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But the real blessings come when you submit the things you want to God, and those prayers turn into, God, I want this, but if you want something else, show me what it is.
Amen.
And when you have that outlook, your life just improves. And if I had had that outlook 10, 15 years ago, it would eliminate a lot of anger and a lot of stress that I had in my life that I had no control over.
Yeah, that's also great advice. And I mean that advice goes for anyone any age. If we would just
Yeah.
submit to God's will and stop trying to micromanage everything, what he has for us is what's for our best, and we're going to find ourselves at peace, we're going to find ourselves content, excited for what we have to do, joining him in the work that he has specifically for us. He's given everybody specific talents and characteristics and traits that work with what he has for us to do. And I think we'd all find it a lot faster if we weren't so busy telling him what we want.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Jackie, I just can't thank you enough for taking time to spend with me. And I know that you and your husband are a pretty private family, so this is a big deal for you to put this out there. And I know that it's going to be something that's important for other people. They're really going to connect to it. Are there any places or any resources that you could email me that I could put in the show notes for anyone that maybe is considering looking into some of these things?
Yes. A lot of the resources I have are Connecticut specific, but they do point back to national sites. So I will send you a link for anybody that is interested for sure.
Great. I'll post those in the show notes. And I just want to thank you again for spending time with me. It was so great to connect again. And I'm just excited to see what comes next. I really am.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been something I never thought I would do, but I'm so glad that I get to do it. And especially that I get to do it with you.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd ever be doing this either. So you never know what God's going to ask you to do. Well, I hope you have an amazing day and go be grateful.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, so I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I want to challenge you to go out today and to just take notice and to stop and really look around and find at least one good thing, one thing to be thankful for. If you do that today, you're going to find so many more things tomorrow without even trying. Because once you start, you begin to see what's always been there. And if you need a refill, you can come join me again for another cup. Make sure to subscribe and have an awesome day and go be grateful.